Audrey Brooks grabbed Owen Parker by the wrist, hard enough that he stopped walking, pulled him off the reception path and behind the garden wall, away from 200 wedding guests, away from the lights and the band and her brother's perfect night, and she said it straight to his face. "I've been watching you all evening. You've smiled at everyone, touched nothing, and you've been looking for the exit since the ceremony ended. So before you disappear, tell me one honest thing, just one." Owen looked down at her hand on his wrist, then at her face. He hadn't said an honest thing out loud in 4 years. Tonight, that was about to change. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you're new here, subscribe. You'll want to stay for all 5 parts. Owen Parker had a system. It was not a complicated system, and it was not a pretty one, but it worked. He showed up to things. He smiled at the right moments. He said the right words. "Congratulations. You look beautiful. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking." And then he found the earliest reasonable exit, and he took it clean and quiet, like a man who knew better than to stay too long at a fire that wasn't his to stand near. He'd been running that system for 4 years. 4 years, 3 months, and if you wanted to get specific about it, and sometimes in the dark part of 3 a.m., when Sophie's nightlight painted the hallway gold, he did get specific 11 days. That was how long Claire had been gone. I didn't call it grief anymore. Grief was what it was in the beginning when he couldn't find her coffee mug without his knees giving out. When Sophie asked where Mommy went, and he had to sit down on the kitchen floor and press his back against the cabinet and breathe through his nose until he could form sentences again. That was grief, raw and violent and honest. What he had now was different. What he had now was management. He managed the mornings. He managed the school pickups and the pediatrician appointments and the Thursday night dinners where Sophie liked her grilled cheese cut diagonally, never straight across, because Claire had always cut it diagonally, and some things you just don't change. He managed the parent-teacher conferences and the nightmare wake-ups and the birthday parties where other kids had 2 parents watching from the bleachers, and Sophie had one, but that one was always there. He managed his job well enough that Nathan Brooks had promoted him twice in 3 years. Commercial architecture wasn't glamorous, but it was precise, and Owen Parker was good at precise. He understood structures. He understood load-bearing walls and stress points, and the places where a building was most likely to fail if you weren't paying attention. He understood those things in buildings. In himself, he had stopped looking. The drive to the Brooks Sullivan wedding venue took 47 minutes from Owen's house in Cary. He'd checked the route twice, printed the confirmation email, even though it was also on his phone, and packed Sophie's emergency kit, a small backpack with noise-canceling headphones, her worn stuffed rabbit named Button, 2 juice boxes, a granola bar, and a printed card that said, "Dad is always nearby," in his handwriting, because Sophie was 7, and loud places sometimes became too loud, and he'd learned the hard way that preparation was the difference between a good night and a terrible one. Sophie sat in the back seat in her blue dress, the one with the tiny yellow flowers that she'd chosen herself from. 3 options he'd laid across the bed, and she had her headphones around her neck, and Button tucked under her arm, and she was looking out the window at the Virginia countryside rolling past, and she said, "Dad." "Yeah, Bug." "Do people cry at weddings because they're happy or because they're scared?" Owen kept his eyes on the road. "What makes you think they're scared?" Jalen's mom cried at her cousin's wedding, and she said it was because she didn't know what was going to happen next. He thought about that for a moment. Maybe both. "Which one were you when you married Mom?" The question landed quietly, the way Sophie's questions always did not. Aggressive, not accusing, just genuinely curious in that way. 7-year-olds are curious, like they don't yet understand that some questions have weight to them. "Happy," he said. And then, because she deserved more than one word, the kind of happy where you can't believe you're actually that lucky, where you keep waiting for someone to correct a mistake. Sophie nodded like that made sense to her. She looked back out the window. "I hope nobody cries today." "Me too, Bug." He didn't tell her that he wasn't planning on staying long enough to find out. Nathan Brooks was the kind of man who made a wedding look easy. That was the thing about Nathan. He was competent in a way that looked effortless, even when Owen knew from 3 years of working alongside him that it wasn't effortless at all. That Nathan worked harder than almost anyone he'd ever met. met that the ease was the product of about 100 invisible decisions made in advance. Nathan had chosen the venue 8 months ago, negotiated the catering himself, personally confirmed with the florist twice, and still found time to coach Owen through a particularly brutal city permit dispute in the middle of it all. Owen respected Nathan Brooks more than almost anyone he knew, which was exactly why he was here, driving 47 minutes to sit in an outdoor venue in a suit he'd had dry cleaned specifically for the occasion, with his daughter in her flower dress, and her emergency rabbit prepared to smile and say, "Congratulations, you look beautiful. I'm so happy for you both," and then find the earliest reasonable exit and take it. That was the plan. He should have known that plans like structures fail at the stress points. The ceremony was held on the south lawn of a converted farmhouse. White chairs arranged in rows beneath old oak trees, strung with warm lights, and Owen sat near the back with Sophie on his left, her headphones on and button in her lap, and he watched Nathan Brooks walk to the end of the aisle with an expression on his face that Owen recognized. Not because he'd seen it on Nathan before, because he'd felt it once himself. It was the face of a man who had just realized he was exactly where he was supposed to be, and who didn't know whether to laugh or cry about it, and who was doing something in between. Owen looked away. He looked at the program in his hands. He read the names of the wedding party without absorbing them, and then he read them again, and then Sophie tugged on his sleeve and pointed up at the oak tree nearest them, where a cardinal sat impossibly still on a low branch, watching the proceedings with what could only be described as professional detachment. And Owen said, "I see him." And Sophie said, "Do you think he was invited?" And he said, "I think he probably crashes a lot of weddings." And Sophie laughed a small bright sound that a woman 3 rows ahead turned around to smile at, and Owen felt the tightness in his chest ease just slightly for just a moment. Then the music changed, and Lena Sullivan appeared at the end of the aisle, and Nathan's face did the thing again, and Owen made himself watch, because Nathan was his friend, and Nathan deserved a witness, and watching people be that happy was not a crime. Even when it made something in your sternum press against your ribs like it was trying to find a way out. He clapped when it was over. He said, "I do," along with Nathan under his breath, "the way you do." He watched them kiss under the oak trees while the cardinal finally flew away. He was fine. He was managing. Everything was under control. The reception was where the system started to strain. The farmhouse had been converted into an event space with exposed wooden beams and Edison bulbs and long communal tables, and there was a band, not a DJ, a real band. 4 musicians who played something that sat between folk and soul and made the whole room feel warmer than the temperature outside, and there were 200 people filling the space with conversation and laughter, and the clinking of glasses, and Sophie had her headphones on inside the bag, but was managing without them so far, which was a victory. But Owen could see in the set of her small shoulders that she was working at it, calculating the noise the way he'd taught her, asking herself the question they'd practiced. Is this too much, or just a lot? He steered them to a table near the side wall. Good exit, proximity, lower foot traffic, farther from these speakers, and got Sophie a plate of things she'd eat, and himself a glass of water. He didn't drink, and he sat with his back mostly to the room and watched his daughter decide whether the stuffed mushrooms were acceptable. "They're okay," she reported. "A little slimy." "That's kind of the point of stuffed mushrooms." "That seems like a design flaw." "Noted. I'll bring it up with the mushroom industry." She ate 3 of them. Owen watched the room without appearing to watch the room, which was a skill he'd developed somewhere in the last 4 years. The ability to be technically present in a space while not actually being in it. He could see Nathan working the tables. Lena radiant in a way that made the room rearrange itself around her older relatives, photographing everything younger cousins, making plans that would probably become stories in 20 years. I was looking for the exit timeline. Reception, dinner, toasts, first dance. He could leave gracefully after the first dance. Maybe during cake if Sophie's energy held and she wanted to stay. He'd say goodbye to Nathan, kiss Lena on the cheek, say beautiful ceremony, so glad we were here, and drive his daughter home, and put her to bed, and sit in the kitchen with a glass of water, and she's been watching you for about 15 minutes. Owen turned his head. A man he didn't know, early 40s, open collar, The comfortable stance of someone who knew almost everyone in the room was settling into the chair beside him with the ease of an old acquaintance. Sorry. The woman by the fireplace, dark hair. She keeps looking over here and then looking away like she's pretending she wasn't. The man smiled. I'm Marcus, Lena's cousin from Charlottesville. Owen shook the offered hand. Owen, Nathan's coworker, right, the architect. Nathan talks about you. Marcus lifted his chin toward the fireplace. You know her. Owen looked. She was standing at the edge of the room near the stone fireplace, a glass of sparkling water in one hand, and she was not watching him exactly. She was watching Sophie. Sophie, who had abandoned the stuffed mushrooms and was now very carefully rearranging the small floral centerpiece on their table, moving stems with the focused precision of a child who had decided this was her project now. The woman by the fireplace had a camera, not a phone, an actual camera, a professional-looking thing with a long lens, and it was hanging at her side, and she wasn't raising it. She was just watching Sophie with an expression that was hard to read from across the room, but that was definitely not boredom. Owen looked away. No, I don't know her. She's Nathan's sister, Marcus said. Audrey, she's a photographer. I think she's doing some candid shots for the wedding. He paused. She's been at this wedding for 5 hours, and I'm pretty sure those are the most engaged her eyes have been all night, so. Owen said nothing. Just an observation, Marcus said pleasantly, and got up and went back to wherever he'd come from. Sophie's limit arrived around 7:15. It wasn't a meltdown. Sophie was past the age of meltdowns in public places, had graduated into something more controlled and more heartbreaking, which was the silent compression. The way she folded herself smaller and pressed her back against him and put her headphones on and stopped talking. He felt it before he saw it, the slight change in her weight against his side, and he looked down, and her eyes were fixed on the middle distance, and her jaw was set. Hey, he said low and close to her ear. Too much. She nodded once, small and tight. Okay. He stood up, took her hand. Let's find somewhere quieter. He navigated them out of the main room through a side door. He'd clocked earlier, a good exit point he'd thought when they arrived, not knowing then that he'd be using it for this, rather than for leaving. It led to a short covered walkway, and then out to a side garden, partially enclosed by a low stone wall, strung with the same warm lights as the ceremony, but quieter by about 60%. A few other guests stood in small clusters at the far end, but the near end, where a wrought iron bench sat under a small oak, was empty. Owen sat down. Sophie climbed into his lap, too old for it by social standards, not too old for it by any other measure, and pressed her face against his collar, and breathed, and he put his arms around her, and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say, because sometimes the kindest thing in the world is someone who doesn't try to talk you out of how you feel. He sat there with his daughter, and listened to the muffled music, and thought about Claire. He thought about the way Claire would have handled this quickly, practically, with a kind of no-nonsense warmth that Sophie had inherited. Come on, Soph. Let's go count how many different kinds of flowers they have out here. I bet there are at least 12. That was Claire, turning the retreat into an adventure. Owen had never been as good at that. He was better at the sitting still. He didn't know how long they'd been there when he heard footsteps on the flagstone path. He looked up. It was the woman from the fireplace. She'd lowered the camera. She was holding it at her side, and she stopped about 10 feet away when she saw him, registered that she'd walked into something private, and he could see her recalibrate, decide whether to reverse course. She didn't reverse course. She walked over, not to the bench, but to the stone wall nearby, and she sat on the wide flat top of it and looked up at the lights in the oak tree and said conversationally to no one in particular, I find that counting lights helps when the room gets to be a lot. Sophie lifted her head. She looked at the woman. The woman wasn't looking at her, was deliberately not looking at her, which Owen recognized immediately as its own kind of intelligence. Sophie said, How many are there? Up here I counted 47, but I might have lost track around 30. A pause. You'd probably do better. You look like someone who's good at counting. I am pretty good at counting. Sophie agreed, and she climbed off Owen's lap and stood on the bench beside him to look up at the lights, and she began under her breath, 1, 2, 3. The woman looked at Owen then, direct. unsmiling, but not unfriendly. A look that said, "I'm not trying to insert myself. I'm just here," he said quietly. "Thank you." "She reminds me of myself at that age," the woman said. "My brother's wedding was the loudest thing I'd ever experienced. I hid in the coat closet." Smart strategy. It was until the flower girl came looking for her jacket and found me crying into a fur coat that turned out to be the bride's grandmother's. How'd that go? The grandmother turned out to be wonderful. Sat with me for 20 minutes and told me stories about her own wedding during the Depression. A slight pause. "So I guess sometimes hiding leads somewhere better than hiding." Sophie announced, 49. "I told you," the woman said. "Better than me." Sophie beamed. She sat back down on the bench close enough to Owen that he could feel her warmth, but the tight compression was gone. She looked at the woman with the frank assessment of a child who has decided to make a judgment. "Are you one of Nathan's people or one of Lena's people?" "Nathan's. I'm his sister. My name is Audrey." "I'm Sophie. This is my dad. His name is Owen, but I call him Dad." "That seems appropriate." Sophie looked at Owen. "I like her," she announced. Owen felt something shift in his chest that he didn't immediately have a name for. Audrey Brooks didn't stay long in the garden. She said it was because she had candid shots to catch, which was true. Owen would see the evidence. Later photographs of the reception that captured things. 200 people had missed. Nathan laughing with a mouthful of cake. Lena dancing with her grandmother. A groomsman proposing quietly and badly to a bridesmaid in the corner by the dessert table. But before she went back inside, she did something that Owen replayed later in the car in the kitchen at 10 p.m., with his glass of water in the particular sleepless hour of 3 a.m. that had become his. She crouched down to Sophie's eye-level adults. So rarely did this, and Sophie noticed every time they didn't, and she said, "It was really nice to meet you, Sophie. You're officially my favorite counter of lights." Sophie said very seriously, "You can count with me next time if there's too many." And Audrey said, "I'd like that very much." And she meant it. You could hear the difference between the words adults said to children, because they felt obligated to say something, and the words adults said when they actually meant them. Owen had become an expert in the distinction. She straightened up, looked at him for a moment with those direct eyes. "Nathan talks about you," she said. "A lot, actually. I recognized you the moment you walked in." Owen didn't know what to do with that. "Good things, I hope." "Depends on your definition." A small private smile. And then she was gone back through the side door, and Sophie was asking whether she could have more of those okay slimy mushrooms, and Owen said yes, and they went back inside. He did not find the earliest reasonable exit. He stayed until the end of the first dance, and then through the cake, and then through 2 more songs, and he told himself it was for Sophie, who had revived entirely, and was now attempting to teach Button the rabbit to line dance, and it had nothing to do with the woman who moved through the room with her camera, and who had not looked at him again directly, not once, which he noticed more than if she had. The boxes were Audrey's idea to fix, and Owen's decision to stay and fix them with her. It happened around 8:30, when Lena's mother, a small, terrified woman named Patricia, who had been vibrating at low-level panic since approximately the processional appeared at Nathan's side, with the information that the favors and the family photo display had been delivered to the wrong building. The venue had a main event space and an adjacent storage building, and someone had put 3 boxes of handmade favors and a framed collection of Brooks and Sullivan family photographs spanning 6 decades into the storage building and locked the door. Nathan had the key. Nathan could not leave the reception for the 30 minutes it would take to sort it out. Lena could not leave either. The venue coordinator had 2 other events running. Patricia was too panicked to be useful. Audrey appeared from somewhere with her camera already lowered and her sleeves already rolled and said, "I'll do it. I just need someone to carry things." She looked at Owen. I didn't know why he said yes. He could have said he needed to stay with Sophie. He could have deferred to Marcus or any of a dozen other capable-looking men in the room. But Nathan was looking at him with that expression he got sometimes at work, not asking exactly, just indicating that he'd be very grateful, and Sophie was currently being supervised by Lena's grandmother, who had taken a shine to her over the flower counting and was now teaching her to waltz, and Owen said, "Sure." The walk to the storage building took about 4 minutes. The night air was cool, the kind of fall evening that remembered summer badly, and was already thinking about winter, and the path between the buildings was lit poorly, and they walked fast, because Audrey walked like someone with a destination. 3 boxes, Owen said. 3 boxes, a folding display stand, and 47 framed photographs, ranging from wallet size to 11 by 14. She had a key in her hand. The venue coordinator assured me it was all clearly labeled. I have some questions about her definition of clearly. Was she the one who mixed up which building? I'm going to take the high road and say it was a miscommunication. That's generous. I'm a generous person, Audrey said. Ask me again in 20 minutes when I'm moving 47 frames. He almost smiled. He caught it before it fully landed, which was another thing he'd gotten good at. The storage building was dim and smelled of old wood and seasonal decorations. The boxes were clearly labeled, Brooks Sullivan Wedding Favors in black marker, and they were stacked in the back behind what appeared to be 30 folding chairs and an inflatable Santa Claus. Ah, Audrey said. Yep. So. I'll move the chairs, Owen said. They worked in the particular silence of 2 people doing a physical task, which has its own language. Owen moved chairs. Audrey checked the boxes and began unstacking frames and wrapped packages. The space was narrow enough that they kept having to navigate around each other, and after the 3rd time, one of them said sorry. And rerouted, Audrey said, without looking up from the box she was opening. You don't have to keep apologizing. We're both just here. Habit. Of what apologizing? I thought about it. Taking up less space than necessary. Audrey looked up then. She held a framed photograph, a wedding photo from what looked like the 1970s. A young couple outside a church, the woman with a bouffant and the man with sideburns, and both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Nathan's grandparents, she said. They were married 53 years. Owen took the frame she held out. He looked at the photograph. 2 people laughing on the best day of their lives. How do they do that? He said, without meaning to say it out loud. 53 years. Look that happy, on purpose. Audrey considered this seriously the way she seemed to consider most things. I think maybe it's not on purpose. I think maybe they just kept deciding to be there. He handed the frame back. She wrapped it carefully. They worked for another 20 minutes, moving boxes and checking labels and navigating around each other in the dim space. And somewhere in the middle of it, the conversation came back the way conversations do when you're doing something with your hands. Nathan says you're one of the best architects he's ever worked with, Audrey said. Nathan's generous. He's not actually. He's very specific about who he compliments. He told me once that he's never met anyone who reads a load-bearing problem faster than you do. She was checking a box. He also said you work every Saturday, and you never take your vacation days, and Sophie brings you lunch to the office sometimes because otherwise you forget to eat. Owen didn't say anything. She must be something, Audrey said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. She's everything, he said, and it came out quieter than he intended, and he didn't know what to do with the space it left, so he picked up another folding chair and moved it. Audrey let the silence sit for a moment before she said, Nathan also told me about your wife. Owen stiffened, not dramatically, not in a way someone unobservant would catch, but Audrey was clearly not someone unobservant. I'm not going to say anything about it, she said immediately. I just wanted you to know that I know so that if you're doing the thing where you're wondering whether to mention her and then deciding not to because it's a wedding and you don't want to put something heavy into a room full of people who are trying to be light, you don't have to calculate that with me. He turned and looked at her. She was looking back at him steady, and there was something in her expression that was not pity. He'd learned to identify pity in the years since Claire died, had gotten good at recognizing its particular shape, but something closer to acknowledgement. Like she was simply confirming I see you. Not just the version you're presenting. You. Her name was Claire, he said. I know. She would have loved this wedding. Audrey smiled small, genuine. What would she have said about the inflatable Santa? She would have asked why it was there and then taken approximately 47 pictures of it. Sounds like she had excellent taste. She had the best taste. He said it without the careful management, without the practiced distance. It just came out. She made everything better just by being in it. The room, the moment, the whole day. You'd be having an okay afternoon and she'd walk in, and it would become a good afternoon without anyone doing anything different. He stopped. He never talked about Claire like that. Not like that. Audrey was still looking at him, not rushing him, not filling the space. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't know why I don't." She said it firmly, but not unkindly. "Don't apologize for that." He put down the chair he'd been holding, looked at the ceiling of the dim storage building, the old wooden beams, the structural logic of a building that had been standing for 60 years. "The favors should go in the second box," he said. "The frames are all in the first two. If we do one trip each, I think we can manage it." Audrey watched him pull his management back around himself. "Okay," she said. She didn't push, but she filed it. They were crossing the lawn back toward the event building. Owen with a box of favors on one shoulder and a folding display stand under his arm. Audrey with a box of framed photographs balanced against her chest and her camera swinging from its strap when Sophie appeared in the doorway. She must have escaped Lena's grandmother. She was still holding Button, and her flower dress had acquired what appeared to be a small smear of icing on the hem, and she was looking at them the way children look when they've been slightly worried and are relieved but are going to pretend they weren't. "There you are," she said. To both of them, Owen noticed. "We had to rescue the wedding," Audrey said. She held out her box slightly. "Family photographs. Very important. Could have been a disaster." Sophie peered into the box at the wrapped frames. "Did you save them?" "All 47. "Wow." Sophie looked at Owen. "You helped?" "I moved chairs." "That sounds hard." It was moderately challenging. Sophie considered Audrey again with that frank weighing look. "You have icing on your camera strap." Audrey looked down. "Oh, yes. I made a brief error in judgment near the cake table earlier." "It happens," Sophie said very seriously. "Last week I sat in a blue pen." "Did you save the pants?" "No, Dad tried." "I tried very hard," Owen confirmed. Sophie looked between them. Something in her expression shifted, settled slightly like a question she'd been silently asking had received a provisional answer. "You can sit with us," she told Audrey. "We're near the side wall. The mushrooms are okay, a little slimy." "I appreciate the warning," Audrey said. They went back inside. It was near the end of the night when Audrey found him alone. Sophie had finally run out of energy and was asleep on two chairs Owen had pushed together. Her Button tucked under her chin headphones on, apparently capable of sleeping through an active reception band. Nathan had seen her and laughed, and Lena had put a small throw blanket over her, and she was completely unconscious, and Owen was standing near the side door, watching her sleep the way parents watch sleeping children, with a relief so profound it borders on reverence. Audrey came and stood beside him. They watched Sophie sleep. "She trusts you completely," Audrey said. "She doesn't have another option." "She does, actually. Kids choose what to trust. She chooses you every day." He looked at the side of Audrey's face. She was watching Sophie with the expression she'd had from across the room hours ago. The one that wasn't boredom, the one he hadn't had a word for then. He thought he had one now: recognition. Like Sophie reminded her of something she wanted to remember. "Nathan said you're a photographer," he said. "Portrait work." "Mostly, yeah. Some commercial when I need the money. But portraits are..." She paused. "Portraits are what I care about. Trying to get a picture of who someone actually is, instead of who they're trying to be." She looked down at her camera, then back at him. "Most people spend the whole session being performed. You wait long enough, they come back to themselves. And then you take the picture. And then I take the picture." He thought about that. "What's the longest you've ever waited?" She almost smiled. "For the right moment, or for someone to stop pretending. Are those different?" "Usually," she said. "Sometimes the same." Quiet settled between them, comfortable in the way that quiet is comfortable between people who aren't working to maintain the silence. The band was playing something slow. Several couples had found their way to the small dance floor. Audrey said without turning her head, "Be honest." He waited. "If I asked you to dance, would you say yes because you wanted to, or because you're too kind to embarrass me by saying no?" He looked at her. She was looking at the dance floor, not at him, and her jaw was set slightly, and he realized in the space of about 2 seconds that this was not flirtation. Or it was not only flirtation. It was a test, and not of his manners or his social grace. She was asking whether he would tell her the truth when the truth was complicated. He said, "I'd say yes because I noticed you before you noticed me. At the fireplace. Before the garden." She turned her head and looked at him. "But I'd also ask," he said, "whether you were running toward something tonight or away from something." The question landed in her eyes before she could stop it. A small, sharp recognition. She looked away first. "Why does that matter?" she asked. "Because the answer changes what kind of yes it would be." She was quiet for a moment. Long enough that he thought he'd misjudged, been too direct, too honest, pushed into territory she hadn't meant to open. Then she said, "Both maybe. Isn't it always both?" He thought about the drive out here, the system, the earliest reasonable exit. "Yeah," he said. "I think it usually is." She reached into the pocket of her dress, a practical detail Owen hadn't noticed, a photographer's instinct for pockets, and came out with a card. She held it out. He took it. "Audrey Brooks. Portrait photography. 540-294-8817. "That's my personal number," she said. "Not the business one. The business one goes to voicemail until Tuesday." He looked at the card, then at her. "I'm leaving," she said, "in 3 weeks. For New York. A photography contract, a big one. A year, probably more." She said it evenly, like she was telling him the temperature. "I'm not mentioning that because I want you to react to it in any particular way. I'm mentioning it because you seem like someone who makes better decisions with the full information." I thought about everything Nathan had said about his sister over the years, the scattered references he'd absorbed without paying them particular attention. "She's stubborn, she's brilliant. She scares me a little when she gets focused on something." Nathan had said that last part with pride. "Thank you," Owen said. He meant the information, and he meant something else, something he didn't quite have a word for yet. The relief of someone who simply told you the truth about their life without dressing it up or managing your reaction. That's a big contract. "It's the biggest thing I've ever been offered." She met his eyes. "I'm going to take it." "Good," he said. She blinked. "That's it? Just good. You worked for it. You should take it." She looked at him for a moment with something in her expression that he couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, and something adjacent to it, something that looked like relief. And then Sophie shifted on her pushed-together chairs and mumbled something in her sleep, and Owen looked over, and when he looked back, Audrey was watching his daughter with that expression again, the one that was recognition. "She's going to be remarkable," Audrey said. "She already is." Audrey picked up her camera from the table where she'd set it. She looked through the viewfinder at Sophie sleeping, and her finger moved to the shutter button, and she held it, and then she lowered the camera without taking the picture. "Some things should just be seen," she said. Owen put the card in his pocket, and that was how the night ended. Not with a dance, not with a dramatic confession, not with any of the things that nights like this are supposed to end with. It ended with his daughter asleep on 2 borrowed chairs, and a business card with a personal number in his jacket pocket, and a woman walking back toward the center of the room with her camera and her sleeves still rolled and icing still on her strap. He watched her go. Then he picked up Sophie. She barely stirred, burrowed her face into his collar. Button clutched in her fist, and he found Nathan near the door and said, "Congratulations, you look beautiful. Best night of my life, to witness, and meant every word of it." And Nathan hugged him and slapped his back and said quietly against his ear, "She noticed you first, you know. I figured you should know that." Owen drove home through the Virginia night with Sophie sleeping in the back seat and the card in his pocket, and the particular silence of someone who has just discovered that the system he'd been running for 4 years had without warning developed a crack. Not a collapse, not a failure, just a crack. The kind that lets in light. I didn't call the number that night. He sat in the kitchen with his glass of water and he turned the card over in his hands, and he thought about a woman who counted lights in oak trees, and who crouched down to Sophie's eye level, and who said some things should just be seen. He thought about Claire the way he always thought about Claire at this hour. And he discovered that for the first time in 4 years, 3 months and 11 days, thinking about Claire and thinking about something new did not feel like a betrayal. He put the card on the kitchen counter. He went to bed. He called the number Thursday. He called Thursday. He'd told himself he'd wait until the weekend. Give himself time to think, to run the numbers the way he ran numbers on every project. Assessing load, calculating risk, identifying the points most likely to fail. He'd put the card on the kitchen counter Monday night and looked at it Tuesday morning and moved it to his desk drawer. Tuesday afternoon and taken it back out Wednesday evening and put it on the counter again. Thursday at 7:14 a.m., while Sophie was eating cereal and watching him from across the table with the particular attention of a child who notices everything and says nothing. He picked up his phone and dialed. It rang twice. "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I wasn't sure either," Owen said. "But I told you I was someone who makes better decisions with full information." Turns out the full information made the decision for me. A beat of silence. Then, "That might be the most architect thing anyone has ever said to me." "I get that a lot." "I doubt that very much." Sophie was watching him over her cereal spoon. He turned slightly toward the window. "Coffee," he said. "If you're still in town, no obligation." "I'm in Raleigh until the 14th. That's 9 days." "I know how many days that is, Owen." He looked out at the backyard. The oak tree that needed trimming, the bird feeder Sophie had painted in first grade, that listed slightly to the left. "Saturday morning, there's a place on Glenwood that—" "I know the place. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. She hung up before he could say anything else. He stood there with the phone in his hand, and Sophie said from behind him, "Was that a friend?" "I think so. Maybe." "You were standing different," she said. "How do you mean?" She thought about it, stirring her cereal. "Like you were paying attention." He didn't know what to say to that. He put his phone in his pocket and got her backpack from the hook by the door and said they were going to be late, and they went. But he thought about it all the way to school. Like you were paying attention. He hadn't realized he'd stopped. The coffee place on Glenwood was small and loud, in the way that small coffee places are always loud, the espresso machine running constantly and the tables close together. And Owen got there 8 minutes early and sat facing the door, because he was the kind of person who sat facing the door, and he ordered a black coffee. He didn't drink, and at exactly 9 o'clock, Audrey Brooks walked in. She was different in daylight. He'd met her in the warm amber of a wedding reception, in the amber of string lights, and the soft glow of a storage building with one working bulb, and she'd been striking in the way that people are striking in that kind of light. But this was Saturday morning light, flat and honest, and she was still striking, which meant it wasn't the light. She sat down across from him without ceremony, unwound a scarf, and picked up the menu, even though she'd clearly been here before. "You ordered already," she said, looking at his untouched coffee. 8 minutes ago. And you didn't drink it." "I was waiting. For me to arrive or for your nerve to come back." He looked at her. "I've got my nerve." "Prove it. Say something true." He hadn't been expecting it that fast. He thought about deflecting, considered it for exactly 1 second, and then said, "I almost didn't call. Not because I didn't want to. Because wanting to scared me more than not calling." Audrey put the menu down. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him across the storage building, steady, unhurried, like she was waiting for the person behind the performance to come back to themselves. "That's honest," she said. "You asked for honest." "I did." She signaled the server. "I'll have what he's not drinking plus 1 for him that he might actually drink if we're here long enough." They were there 2 hours and 40 minutes. He drank the coffee. What he learned about Audrey Brooks over those 2 hours and 40 minutes in no particular order. She'd been taking photographs since she was 11, starting with her father's old film camera that she'd found in a closet, and which nobody had bothered to tell her was broken. She'd taken a whole roll of film on a broken camera, 24 pictures of nothing. And when she brought it to the drugstore to be developed, and the man behind the counter told her the camera hadn't been working, she'd gone home and asked her father to fix it, and he'd said it was beyond fixing, and she'd taken it apart herself and put it back together, and it had worked after that. Nathan had called it the most terrifying thing he'd ever witnessed in a 7-year-old. She'd studied photography at VCU, worked 3 years at a portrait studio in Richmond that she described as technically good and spiritually exhausting, spent a year doing contract work for a nonprofit that documented families in rural Virginia who were losing farms that had been in their families for generations. She didn't describe that year as good or bad. She described it as the year I understood what photography was actually for. The New York contract was with a media foundation, a year-long project documenting stories of people rebuilding after various forms of loss. Housing, career, marriage. She said the phrase various forms of loss with care, like she was aware of its weight in the specific context of sitting across from Owen Parker. He noticed. "You're good at that," he said. "At what? Saying difficult things without making them land wrong. I grew up with Nathan. Difficult things were basically the family language." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "He's a good man, my brother. He loves hard, and he protects hard, and sometimes those two things crash into each other. I know. I've worked with him for 3 years. Has he ever tried to protect you?" Owen thought about this. "In his way, he doesn't make it obvious." "No," she said, "he doesn't." She looked at him. "He told me about your wife. He said she was one of those people who make every room better. He said losing her changed you." Owen was quiet. "He also said you became a better father after," Audrey said. Which he meant as a compliment, but I think he didn't understand was also a complicated thing to say. "It is complicated," Owen said, "because it's true." How? I thought about how to say it. When Claire was alive, I took for granted that Sophie had a good life. Claire made everything feel safe the way some people just do, that they anchor a room. After she was gone, I couldn't take it for granted anymore. So I paid attention. Every day I paid attention. And the cost of that? He looked at his coffee cup. I stopped paying attention to anything else. Audrey didn't fill the silence. She let it sit, which was exactly right. "Sophie noticed," he said. "Last Thursday. I was on the phone with you, and she said I was standing different, like I was paying attention." He looked up. Audrey was watching him with something in her expression that was not quite a smile, something more interior than that. "She sounds like she sees a lot," Audrey said. "She sees everything. It's terrifying and extraordinary. Nathan's like that too." She paused. "I used to think it was a curse having someone that close who sees you. Now I think it's the only thing that's ever kept me honest." Owen looked at her across the table in the Saturday morning light and thought, here is a person who hasn't learned to disappear. He didn't know whether that made things better or worse. He suspected it made things more. The second time they met was her idea. A Tuesday evening, a week before she left. She'd been doing some shooting in downtown Raleigh Street portraits, she said. People's faces when they thought no one was looking, and she texted him at 4:47 p.m. "Done by 6 if you and Sophie want to walk. I know a good path by the creek." Sophie could bring button. He showed his phone to Sophie, who was doing homework at the kitchen table, and who looked at it with careful eyes. "Who's Audrey?" she said, even though she knew. "Nathan's sister, from the wedding." "The light counter." "The light counter." Sophie looked back at her homework. She drew 3 circles in the margin of her worksheet. "Is she your friend?" "I think so, maybe." The same answer he'd given before. "Do you want her to be more than your friend?" Owen sat down at the table across from her. Sophie was still looking at her worksheet pencil moving in small circles, and he knew this was one of those moments where what he said mattered more than almost anything. Not because it would make or break the evening, but because Sophie was 7 and she was building her understanding of how the world worked from these moments brick by brick, and he owed her the truth. "I don't know yet," he said. "I just met her, but I like talking to her, and she likes you." Sophie was quiet. Then, "What if you like her, and then she goes away?" He didn't answer immediately. He sat with the question the way it deserved to be sat with. "Then we'll be sad for a while," he said. "And we'll be okay after." "How do you know we'll be okay?" Because we've been okay before, when things were much harder. Sophie drew another circle. I don't want to be sad again. I know. He reached across the table and covered her small hand with his. But I also don't want to spend our whole lives making sure nothing can get close enough to make us sad. Because then, nothing can get close enough to make us happy either. She looked up at him then. Really looked the way she had across the cereal bowls, the attention she gave to things she was deciding about. Okay, she said. We can go. She got Button from the couch without being asked. The walk by the creek was easy, in the way that some evenings are easy, where you're not working to make something happen, and so things happen. Audrey had abandoned her camera, had left it in her car, she said, because some things should just be seen, and she walked with her hands in her jacket pockets, and Sophie walked between them, which neither of them had planned, which Sophie had simply decided was the arrangement. Sophie showed Audrey the way she counted the trees along the path. Not sequentially, she had a system where she only counted the ones with interesting bark, which she had a specific definition for, that she explained in great detail, and which Audrey listened to with the seriousness it deserved. So these two don't count, Audrey said, looking at two smooth-barked trees. But this one does because of the, what did you call it? The face wrinkle. See, it looks like an old man thinking. Audrey leaned in. She looked at the bark. You know what, you're completely right. He looks like he's trying to remember where he put his keys. Sophie laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind Owen didn't hear from her around new people very often. He watched it happen and felt something shift in him. Careful, slow, like weight redistributing across a structure that had been holding too much in one place. They walked for an hour. Sophie found a good stick. Audrey helped her determine it was objectively a 10 out of 10 stick, based on criteria they developed together. Owen carried the stick home because it was too good to leave. At the car, Sophie hugged Audrey. Not because she was asked to, not because Owen prompted her. She just walked up and put her arms around Audrey's waist and pressed her face against her jacket, and Audrey looked at Owen over the top of Sophie's head with an expression that said, I wasn't expecting that, and also, I'm not going to take it lightly. She hugged Sophie back. Careful. Real. Owen drove home with a 10 out of 10 stick in his back seat, and something cracked open in his chest that he was trying very hard not to name yet. The night had almost ended before it started was 4 days before she left. They were at Audrey's studio, a rented space in a building near the university. 2 rooms, white walls covered with photographs pinned at angles rather than hung, because she said straight lines made her feel like she was working for a magazine. She'd been packing the studio wasn't hers permanently, and she'd be giving it up when she went to New York, and Owen had come over after Sophie went to her friend Maisie's for a sleepover, ostensibly to help, actually to do the thing they'd been doing for 10 days, which was talk until they ran out of room to talk, and then find more room. She was wrapping photographs in paper when she said, James asked me to be careful. Owen was packing a box of books. James, my ex, we broke up 8 months ago. But he texted me last week, when I told him I was going to New York. She kept wrapping. He said to be careful about getting attached to things that would make it hard to go. Owen kept packing. What did you say? I said it was a little late for that advice. He looked up. Audrey set down the photograph she was wrapping. She turned to face him, and she was doing the thing she sometimes did, where she made a decision about something before she said it. He could see it happening, the small interior preparation. He's the reason I almost didn't take a contract in London 2 years ago, she said. A 6-month residency. Incredible opportunity. He said long distance didn't work, and he didn't want to put the relationship through it, and I believed him. So I declined it. She looked at her hands. 6 months later, he told me he didn't love me anymore. Just like that. Like it was a weather report. Owen was quiet. I'm not telling you that to make you feel sorry for me, she said. I'm telling you so you understand why, when you said good about New York just automatically without hesitating, I didn't know what to do with it. He set the book in his hands down on the box. He looked at her across the half-packed room. I meant it. I know you meant it. That's the part that undid me. He crossed the room. Not dramatically, there was nothing dramatic about it. Just a man walking across a studio, to stand closer to someone who had just told him something true. He stopped a foot from her, and he looked at her, and he said, "I'm not James. I know that. I'm also scared," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I'm scared in ways I don't have words for yet, and I'm working through them. But I'm working through them because you matter not despite it." She looked at him for a long moment. "3 more days," she said. 3 more days. "And then I'm gone for a year. And then you're gone for a year. So what is this?" She wasn't asking it accusatorially. She was asking it honestly, the way she asked everything. "Because I need to know what I'm leaving. I need to know what I'm—" She stopped, started again. "I'm not asking you to solve it. I'm just asking you to say what it is." Owen looked at the photographs on her walls, hundreds of them. Strangers and families and ordinary moments caught in the particular grace of being seen. And he thought about load-bearing walls, about the structures that hold everything else up, about what happens to a building when the center gives way. "I think," he said carefully, "that you might be the first person I've wanted to pay attention to in 4 years." Audrey breathed out. A long, slow breath. She looked at him, and then she did something he wasn't expecting. She leaned forward and put her forehead against his shoulder just for a moment, just briefly, like setting something down. Then she stepped back and picked up another photograph to wrap. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay." She was wrapping again, her hands steady. "Help me get the top shelf. There are about 30 frames up there, and some of them are heavier than they look." He reached up to the shelf. "Owen," she said. He looked over. "Sophie, does she know that this is something?" He thought about his daughter's careful eyes, about the circles she'd drawn in the margins of her homework, about what if you like her and then she goes away. "She knows enough," he said. "She'll know more when there's more to know." Audrey nodded. She took the frame he handed down. "She's going to be fine," Audrey said. "Whatever this becomes, she's going to be fine because she has you and you pay attention." He looked at her. "And because," she added, not looking at him, focused on the wrapping, "I intend to send her exactly 1 photograph from New York per week, of things I think she'd find interesting, if that's okay." Owen looked at his hands on the shelf, the old wooden surface, the photographs waiting to come down. "Yeah," he said. "That's okay." Joel. The morning she left, he didn't go to the airport. That was her request, not his avoidance. She'd been clear. "Don't come to the airport. I cry at airports, and I don't want the last image you have of me to be ugly crying at a security checkpoint." He'd said he doubted she was capable of being ugly, and she'd thrown a dish towel at him, which was the only time in 10 days she'd thrown anything, and it had felt like an important milestone. Sophie wrote Audrey a note the night before. Owen hadn't asked her to, hadn't even mentioned it was an option. He found her at the kitchen table with her good markers, the ones saved for special occasions, writing in her careful 7-year-old printing on a folded piece of paper. He didn't ask what it said. She sealed it with a butterfly sticker from her collection. She had very particular feelings about her butterfly stickers, and handed it to Owen to deliver. He drove over to Audrey's emptied studio that evening, where she was doing the final sweep, and handed her the note. She read it in the middle of the empty room, and whatever was in it made her close her eyes for a moment, press the paper against her chest. She looked at Owen. She drew a picture on the inside. What of 3 people on a creek path? One of them is holding a stick. She folded the note back carefully. She labeled them, Owen, Sophie, and then the third one just says the counter. Owen's throat did something he managed. She labeled you, he said. She labeled me. Audrey put the note in her bag in the inner pocket, the careful one. I think that might be the best thing anyone has ever given me. He walked her to her car. The night was cold now, full fall, the kind of air that announces a season has ended. She turned at the car door. I'm going to call you, she said, when I land. I'll answer. And when it's hard. She stopped, looked at him with those direct eyes. When it gets hard, because it will get hard. Owen, I need you to not go quiet on me. I need you to not do the disappearing thing. He looked at her. What disappearing thing? The thing where you're scared so you manage instead. The thing where you get very responsible and very reasonable, and you stop saying what you actually feel. She held his gaze. I've seen you do it twice now, once at the wedding and once at the studio last week before you walked across the room. Don't do it from New York. I can't reach you from New York when you disappear. He stood with that. I'll try, he said. I know you will. She reached up and put her hand briefly against his jaw. That's why I gave you my personal number. She got in the car. He stood on the curb and watched her drive away, and he didn't move until the taillights were gone, and then he stood there a little longer anyway, in the cold, paying attention to the space where the car had been. His phone buzzed at 11:23 that night. Landed. Ugly cried at security anyway. New York is loud and smells like pizza, and I already miss the creek. Tell Sophie I counted 42 interesting trees on the drive to the airport, and none of them had face wrinkles. He typed back. She'll want a photo. Also, I'm glad you landed. Also, I was paying attention tonight when you drove away. I thought you should know. He put his phone on the counter next to where the business card used to be. For a long time he stood in the quiet kitchen, and he thought about load-bearing walls, and about structures that hold everything up, and about what it means when something you thought was just a crack turns out to be a door. He didn't manage the feeling. For the first time in 4 years, 3 months, and 18 days, he just let it be there. The first month was the best month, and Owen would understand later that this was by design, not by anyone's manipulation, but by the simple physics of longing, which burns hottest when it's newest. Audrey called when she landed, and she called the next morning, and she called 3 days after that from a fire escape in Brooklyn, where she'd been shooting a family who lived on the 4th floor and had turned their balcony into a garden. She described the garden in detail, tomato plants in October. She said, still hanging on, which she found either inspiring or delusional, and couldn't decide which. Owen was in his car in a parking garage eating a sandwich at 1 p.m. because he'd forgotten to eat before noon again, and he sat in the dark of the garage and listened to her talk about Brooklyn tomatoes, and felt something in him that he'd almost forgotten the texture of. Anticipation. The specific warmth of looking forward to a voice. Sophie got her first photograph on a Wednesday, 9 days after Audrey left. It appeared in the mail, actual mail of 4x6 print in a small envelope with Sophie's name on it in Audrey's handwriting. Sophie opened it at the kitchen table and held it up a fire hydrant in Lower Manhattan, painted bright yellow instead of the standard red, with someone's forgotten umbrella hanging off it and a pigeon sitting on top like it owned the property. Sophie stared at it for a long time. Then she got up without saying anything and came back with a piece of paper and her good markers, and she drew a picture of the creek path and the 10 out of 10 stick propped against the interesting bark tree, and she put it in an envelope and asked Owen for Audrey's New York address. Owen didn't say anything about it. He just got her the address. That was how it started. Every Wednesday, a photograph from Audrey. Every Thursday or Friday, a drawing from Sophie. Owen watched his daughter develop a correspondence with a woman she'd known for 10 days, conducted entirely in images, and he understood that Audrey had known exactly what she was doing when she'd proposed it. She wasn't trying to replace anything. She was building something parallel and genuine at Sophie's pace on Sophie's terms. He loved her for it before he let himself use the word. Nathan called on a Sunday 6 weeks after the wedding, while Owen was raking leaves in the backyard, and Sophie was supposed to be helping, but had instead invented a game that involved jumping into the pile before he finished making it. So, Nathan said without preamble. Owen kept raking. So. My sister texts me approximately 40% more than she used to. Is that right? She also sent me a photo of a fire hydrant with a note that said, Sophie would like this, and I've been trying to figure out how my 7-year-old niece became better friends with my sister than I am. Sophie is very compelling. Owen. He stopped raking. Sophie launched herself into the half-formed pile and came up with leaves in her hair triumphant. He held up a finger to her 1 minute, and she flopped back into the leaves like she was making a snow angel. Nathan, say what you need to say. A pause on the line. The particular pause of a man choosing his words, which Nathan always did, even when what came out seemed unfiltered. I want to know what your intentions are. My intentions? With my sister. Owen looked at his daughter in the leaves. at the rake in his hand, at the backyard he'd maintained for 4 years because Claire had loved this backyard, had planned a vegetable garden. She never got to plant, had stood at the kitchen window in the mornings with her coffee and said, "Someday we'll fix up that fence." "I don't know yet," he said. That's the honest answer. That's not good enough for Audrey. I didn't say it was good enough. I said it was honest. Another pause. You know what I've watched you do for 3 years. I've watched you be the most reliable, competent, emotionally available man in every professional situation I've put you in. I've watched you handle impossible clients and city bureaucrats and project collapses at 5 p.m. on a Friday, and you never flinch. You just fix it. Nathan's voice dropped. And then I've watched you go home and build walls around yourself so high I can't see you over them from across the parking lot. Owen didn't say anything. My sister doesn't need another man who calls his fear a sacrifice, Nathan said. She had one of those. It cost her London. I know about James. Then you know that what he did, the way he made her small for his comfort, and then left anyway, that carved something out of her. She went into New York to rebuild that. And I am not going to watch someone do it to her again, even someone I respect as much as I respect you. Owen stood in the backyard, rake in hand, leaves scattered. Sophie now lying completely flat in the pile, staring at the sky. Nathan, I'm not James. Prove it by not acting like him. The line went quiet for a moment. She matters, Owen said. Not as a defense. As a statement of fact, the way he stated facts about structures without embellishment, without decoration. She matters more than I know how to handle yet. I'm working on the handling part. Nathan was quiet for long enough that Owen thought the call might have dropped. Then, she told me you said good when she told you about New York. I meant it. I know you did. That's the only reason I'm having this conversation instead of a different one. A breath. Just don't go quiet on her. Whatever you do, she can handle hard. She can't handle invisible. Owen thought about Audrey in the empty studio, her hand on his jaw. Don't do the disappearing thing. Yeah, he said. I know. I went back to the leaves. Sophie looked up at him from the pile. Was that Nathan? Yeah. What did he want? Owen started raking again, redistributing the leaves Sophie had scattered. To make sure I'm behaving. Sophie considered this. Are you? Working on it. She sat up in the leaves. Dad? Audrey sent me a picture of a dog wearing a sweater yesterday. A real sweater, with buttons. I saw it. She texted me the same photo. She said the dog's name was Gerald. Gerald is an excellent name for a dog in a sweater. Sophie pulled a leaf out of her hair and looked at it. I like her, she said in the careful way she said important things. I want to keep liking her. Owen looked at his daughter. What do you mean? I mean. She pulled another leaf out. I mean, I don't want to stop. Like how you stopped with the Hendersons after Mom died. You used to like them, and then you stopped going to their dinners, and now we don't see them anymore. Owen set down his rake. He sat on the back step even though there were still leaves everywhere. Sophie, did that bother you, the Hendersons? Not the Hendersons specifically. She looked up at him. Just the stopping. You stopped a lot of things. He looked at her, his daughter 7 years old, who saw everything, and said most of it eventually in her own time. You're right, he said. I did. I don't want you to stop with Audrey. He breathed in, breathed out. I'm going to try very hard not to. She studied his face the way she studied important things, and then she nodded small and serious and picked up a handful of leaves and threw them at him. Okay, she said. But you have to help me remake the pile. You wrecked it. He got up and picked up the rake. 2 months became 3, 3 became 4. The calls continued. Tuesday nights, which became their night without either of them declaring it officially. Owen would put Sophie to bed, and Audrey would be done with her evening shoot, and they'd talk for an hour, or sometimes 2, and the conversations moved through everything the project she was working on, which involved photographing 47 families in 4 boroughs who had rebuilt something, a business, a relationship, a home, a sense of self after losing something else. The permit crisis. Owen was managing on a mixed-use development in Durham. Sophie's ongoing correspondence with Audrey, which had evolved from drawings to photographs, now that Owen had given her the old point-and-shoot camera he used to use for site documentation. Sophie photographed everything. The interesting bark trees. Gerald's sweater. Audrey had sent a second photo, the 10 out of 10 stick which lived now by the back door, her cereal in the mornings, the bird feeder that listed left, Owen's hands on a blueprint which she'd taken without telling him and which Audrey had texted him about separately. She sent me a photograph of your hands. It's one of the best things I've ever received. I'm going to print it. He hadn't known what to say to that. He'd said she learned from someone good. Audrey had sent back a single word, Owen. He'd sat with that for a while. The hard part started around month 4. Not dramatically, nothing collapsed, no single thing broke. It was accumulation. The missed calls when his projects ran late, and her shoots ran long, and the 2-hour time zone difference became 3 hours of missed windows. The week she was sick with a bad cold and too exhausted to talk, and he sent food delivery to her apartment because it was the only thing he could do from 400 miles away, which felt both kind and devastatingly insufficient. The night Sophie had a nightmare at 2 a.m., and he was on the phone with a panicked Audrey at 2:15 because she'd had a hard shooting day involving a family whose story had gotten under her skin, and he was managing both things and not doing either of them particularly well. He didn't go quiet. He kept his promise. But managing from a distance felt like trying to read a building's load from a photograph. You could see the shape, but not the stress. The confrontation with Nathan happened on a Wednesday. It had been 4 months since the wedding. Owen was in Nathan's office for a project review that ran long, and when the last person left, Nathan closed the door and sat back down and looked at him with an expression that was not the professional one. "She called me last night," Nathan said. Owen knew immediately which she. "Is she okay?" "She's tired. The project is harder than she expected. The family she's been working with this week." Nathan stopped. "It doesn't matter the details. She's tired." "I know. We talked Monday." "She said you were distracted on Monday." Owen looked at Nathan. "I had a project crisis Monday. A client threatened to pull out of a $4 million contract over a zoning issue at 4 p.m. I handled it, and then I called her. She said you sounded like you were handling her too." The words landed with a specific accuracy that Owen didn't enjoy. "Handling her," he repeated. "Like a problem to be managed, not a person to be—" Nathan picked up a pen and set it down again. "She didn't say it that way. She said you sounded like you were somewhere else. And she said she understood, she knows you're busy. She wasn't complaining." He looked at Owen directly. But Audrey only defends someone when she's protecting them from her own feelings about them, so. Owen sat with that. "I didn't mean to," he said. "I know you didn't mean to. It doesn't matter what you mean, Owen. You know that better than anyone. Structures fail at the stress points, whether you intended them to or not." That landed harder than it should have, partly because Nathan had clearly been saving it. The architecture metaphor, the pivot of Owen's own professional language against him, and partly because it was exactly right. "What does she need?" Owen asked. Nathan gave him a look. "She needs you to figure that out yourself. If I tell you what my sister needs, you'll give her that thing, and it won't count." He picked up the pen again. "But I will say, she went to New York to rebuild something James took from her. The belief that she could want a big life and be loved at the same time. That those two things didn't have to cancel each other out." His jaw set slightly. "Don't be the second person who makes her feel like loving you costs her who she is." Owen drove home with Nathan's words sitting in the passenger seat. He called Audrey that night. Not Tuesday. Wednesday, unscheduled. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay, Sophie?" "Sophie's fine. She's asleep." He was in the kitchen, the house quiet, the bird feeder just visible outside the window in the porch light. "I want to apologize." "For what?" "Monday. I was distracted and I managed you like a situation instead of—" He stopped, started again. "You called me, and I was already somewhere else, and I brought you into wherever I was, instead of going to wherever you were." Silence on the line. Then, "Nathan called you." "Nathan talked to me. He didn't tell me to call. This is mine." A longer silence. "It wasn't that bad, Owen." "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" "Don't make it smaller so I feel better about it. You teach me to be honest. Let me be honest." He heard her breathe. "Okay. I was distracted, and you deserved better, and I'm sorry." "Okay." Her voice was quieter now, the particular quiet of someone setting something down. "Thank you. How are you actually?" "Tired." A pause. "Really tired. This project is the people are extraordinary, and the work is important, and I believe in it completely. And I'm tired down to my bones, and I'm in an apartment the size of your kitchen, and I haven't been outside for fun in 11 days. When's your next day off?" "Saturday, theoretically." "Then Saturday is yours. Don't shoot anything. Don't answer professional emails. Go outside somewhere that isn't a shoot location and take a picture of something just because you want to." She was quiet for a moment. "You sound like you know what I need." "Nathan didn't tell me. I pay attention." He heard her laugh, quiet, real, the one that didn't perform anything. "I miss the creek," she said. "I know. Sophie photographed it Monday. She's sending it Thursday. She photographs everything now. She learned from someone good." The same echo, deliberate. He heard it land. "Owen," she said, softly. "Still here. I'm glad you called. I'm going to keep calling." He looked at the bird feeder. "Not because I'm managing, because I want to." She said, "I know the difference." He said, "I know you do." The crisis that changed everything happened on a Saturday in February, 4.5 months after Audrey left. Owen knew the morning market on Blount Street. Sophie loved it, had loved it since she was 4. The produce stands, and the woman who made kettle corn, and the man who sold handmade birdhouses that Sophie had been lobbying for since September. It was crowded the way it was always crowded on Saturdays, shoulder to shoulder between the stalls, and Owen kept Sophie's hand in his, and they moved through the crowd, and he was thinking about Audrey, specifically about the text she'd sent that morning. A photograph of a bakery window in the West Village, with the caption, "If I lived here for 100 years, I would still be amazed that this is real." And he was in the middle of typing back when Sophie's hand went out of his. Not pulled, not grabbed, just went. He looked up from his phone. She wasn't beside him. He turned full around. She wasn't behind him. He moved immediately, phone in hand, scanning the produce stand to his left, the kettle corn station ahead, the birdhouse man to the right, and he moved toward the center of the market where the crowd was thickest and called her name, once controlled, and then twice louder. And by the third time, his voice had a quality in it that made the woman beside him turn and look. He found her 6 minutes later. 6 minutes was not a long time. 6 minutes was also the longest 6 minutes of Owen Parker's life, longer than the drive to the hospital 4 years ago. Longer than the waiting room. Longer than the conversation with the doctor that had changed everything. She was standing with a police officer, a young woman with her radio crackling outside the birdhouse man's stall, holding button with both hands, her face doing the thing it did when she was trying very hard not to cry in public. "Dad." She said it before he reached her, said it the way she said it only when she'd been scared. The word that meant she needed to know he was real and present and there. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and crouched down to her level and put both hands on her face. "I've got you. I've got you. You're okay." She pressed her face into his shoulder, and the cry she'd been holding back came out. Not huge, not dramatic. Just the shaky exhale of a child who'd spent 6 minutes being braver than she should have had to be. The officer could... Sophie had approached her on her own, had seen the uniform and gone directly to her, which was what they'd practiced, which was Owen doing the right thing in advance, without knowing when he'd need it. He thanked the officer. He held his daughter until she stopped shaking. When she pulled back, she was looking at him with her careful eyes. Except they weren't careful now. They were raw. The way Sophie's eyes only got when she'd decided to say something that mattered regardless of how it landed. "You were on your phone," she said. He looked at her. "I know." "You were texting Audrey." He didn't deny it. Yes. She looked at him. Her jaw said a gesture he recognized because it was Claire's gesture, the one Sophie had inherited without knowing. I got scared, she said. And you weren't there. I know, Bug. I'm sorry. You said you were going to pay attention. He put his hands on her shoulders. Sophie, I'm sorry. You're right, and I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, Is it Audrey's fault? I understood immediately what she was asking. Not whether Audrey had caused the distraction. Sophie understood cause and effect precisely. She was asking something else. She was asking whether love was the thing that made people disappear. Whether it was better not to have it. He sat down on the sidewalk outside the birdhouse stall in the middle of the market, which was not a thing he would normally do, but this was not a normal moment. He sat down and pulled Sophie down next to him. No, he said. It's not Audrey's fault. It's mine. I let myself be somewhere else when I should have been here. That's not about who I was texting. That's about me making a bad choice. But you were thinking about her. I think about a lot of things. I think about work sometimes, and I lose track. I think about a project and I miss something. That's not the project's fault. That's me. He looked at her. Audrey is not why I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't paying attention because I was afraid. Sophie frowned. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I was fully here, fully in this morning, I'd have to feel how much I also miss her. And that's a big feeling, and I didn't want to feel it in the middle of the market. Sophie sat with that. She looked at Button. I miss her too sometimes. I know. And I'm also kind of scared of missing her. Because she turned Button over in her hands. The worn rabbit that had belonged to her before anything, before the loss, before the management, before all of it. Because what if we miss her and she doesn't come back? Owen looked at his daughter. At the question that was really every question, the one underneath all of Sophie's careful eyes and margin circles and deliberate judgments. The fear that love was a thing that left. That the people you reached for eventually disappeared. Sophie. He waited until she looked at him. You know how you have the pictures of Mom on your bookshelf? Yeah. And sometimes you look at them before bed. Yeah. Does looking at them make you miss her more, or does it help? She thought about it seriously the way she thought about serious things. Both. But mostly it helps. Because it reminds me she was real. And that I'm still... She stopped. Started again. That I still have her. He put his arm around her. Loving someone doesn't make them safe from going, he said quietly. I can't promise you that. But it does mean you keep them. Even when they're gone or far away, you keep them. You can't lose someone you love. You can only miss them. Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder. Your mom didn't disappear because I love Audrey, he said. It's not a trade. There's no amount of room that gets taken. You can love more people, and the first love doesn't shrink. They sat on the sidewalk in the February market while people moved around them. After a while, Sophie said, I want a birdhouse. He laughed, unexpected, genuine. Yeah. The blue one with the green roof. Let's go look at it. She stood up and held out her hand, and he took it. He did not let go until they were back in the car. He called Audrey from the car, while Sophie was buckled in the back with the birdhouse in her lap, examining the craftsmanship with the focus of someone who intended to have opinions about it. I need to tell you something, he said when she answered. What happened? Not a question. She heard it in his voice. Sophie got separated from me in the market. 6 minutes. She's fine. She went straight to a police officer. She's completely fine. But I was... He stopped. I was on my phone, texting you. Silence. Audrey. I'm here. Her voice was careful. Is she okay? She's in the back seat examining a birdhouse we just bought. She's fine. Okay. A beat. Owen. I'm not telling you so you feel responsible. I'm telling you because I told her I'd be honest, and I want to be honest with you too. I got distracted. I made a bad choice, and it scared my kid, and I own that. Okay. He could hear her working something out. But you're telling me. Because you're part of my life, the real part, And I don't want to... He stopped, looked in the rearview mirror at Sophie, who was testing whether the birdhouse door opened. It did. She looked enormously satisfied. I don't want to manage what I tell you so that you feel better. I want to tell you the real thing. Audrey was quiet for a moment. She asked if it was my fault, didn't she? He didn't ask how she knew. Yes. What did you say? I said no. I said it was mine. And then I tried to explain the rest. The rest. That loving you doesn't take anything from her. That love doesn't replace. It makes room. He heard Audrey go very still on the other end. Owen, she said, and her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before. I know, he said. You just said, I know what I said. The word had come out without management, without calculation, without the careful architectural assessment of load and stress and failure points. It had come out the way true things come out when you stop working to contain them. Loving you. Okay, Audrey said, quietly. The same word she'd used in the studio when he'd crossed the room, when she'd leaned her head against his shoulder and set something down. Okay, Owen said, in the back seat. Sophie held up the birdhouse. Dad, it has a little porch. He looked in the mirror. I see that. Audrey, Sophie called toward the phone louder. The birdhouse has a porch. Sophie, I'm not on speaker. But Sophie was already at the volume of someone who intended to be heard. Audrey, birdhouse, porch. He heard Audrey laugh. Not the quiet interior one. The real one, open and bright and slightly undignified and completely entirely her. Tell her, Audrey said, the porch is non-negotiable. Every birdhouse needs a porch. He looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter holding her birdhouse with the little porch, laughing at Audrey, laughing, the sound of it filling the car, and he thought, this is what I was protecting myself from. Not the fear, not the loss. This. That night after Sophie was in bed with the birdhouse on her windowsill, Owen sat in the kitchen and stared at the counter and thought about what Nathan had said weeks ago. My sister doesn't need another man who calls his fear a sacrifice. I had been sacrificing. He'd been so careful about it, so measured, so reasonable, so responsible, that he'd managed to make his fear look almost noble. He was protecting Sophie. He was protecting Audrey's future. He was being realistic about distance and time, and the 1,000 complications of loving someone 400 miles away with a 7-year-old at home. But Sophie had put her hand in his, and he'd been somewhere else. And Audrey was tired and alone in an apartment the size of his kitchen, and the most he'd offered some nights was a phone call, where he sounded like he was handling the situation. He was a man who understood load-bearing walls. He understood that the load didn't disappear when you redistributed it. It just moved. He had been putting everything on Sophie, the weight of being his whole world, his entire reason, the only thing he let himself love without restriction. And she was 7 years old, and it was too much, and she had sat on a sidewalk in February and told him that loving someone scared her, because what if they went away? She'd learned that from him. The thought was not comfortable. He sat with it anyway. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Audrey. It was late, and she'd have an early shoot. He typed a message instead, took longer than usual because he was trying to say it right. I've been thinking about what you asked me the first night, whether I was running toward something or away from something. I told you it was probably both. I think I've been more honest about the toward part and less honest about the away. I'm working on closing that gap. I wanted you to know. He set the phone down, picked it up, added. Also, Sophie says the birdhouse porch is the best thing that's happened this week, and I think she might be right. He put the phone on the counter and went to check on Sophie. She was asleep, button tucked under her chin, the birdhouse on the windowsill where the moonlight hit the little porch. He stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter and thought about Claire, the way he always thought about Claire at this hour, and discovered again that thinking about Claire and thinking about the future did not feel like a betrayal. It felt like both things being true at the same time. He was getting better at holding both. His phone lit up on the counter in the kitchen. He went back and looked at it. Audrey had sent a photograph. Not of New York, of a printed photograph she'd pinned to her apartment wall. He recognized it, the creek path Sophie's drawing from 2 months ago, the three figures with the stick and the interesting bark tree. Owen. Sophie. The counter. Beneath it she'd put a small sticky note in her handwriting. The photo was close enough that he could read it. Running toward, just so you know. He stood in the kitchen and held his phone and felt the crack in his chest, the one that had opened the night of the wedding, the one that had been slowly, steadily letting in light, open another increment. He put the phone down. He stood at this kitchen window and looked at the backyard, the oak tree, the bird feeder that listed left. The garden Claire had planned and never planted. Someday, he thought. We'll fix up the fence. He'd been thinking of it as her unfinished thing, preserved waiting. But it was just a fence. And it was February, and spring came every year, whether you were ready or not. He thought maybe this year he might plant something. Spring came the way Owen had told himself it would, not dramatically, not all at once. It came in increments, a warmer Tuesday a week, where Sophie didn't need her heavy coat. The bird feeder that listed left suddenly hosting 3 new visitors that she cataloged in a notebook she'd started keeping since Audrey had sent her a photograph of a sparrow on a Manhattan fire escape, with the caption, "I didn't know I'd miss birds until I moved somewhere they were hard to find." Sophie had taken that personally and appointed herself the documenter of every bird within range of their backyard. Owen planted things in March. Not the full garden Claire had planned that felt like too much, too fast a renovation. He wasn't ready for, but a row of tomatoes along the south fence and 2 rosemary bushes near the back step, because Sophie had announced that rosemary smelled like something important, and she wanted more of it. He didn't tell Audrey about the garden until it was already in the ground, and when he did, she went quiet for a moment and then said, "Good." The same way he'd said good about New York, simply directly meaning more than the word. He understood that more now. He'd learned it from her. 5 months had become 6. 6 had become 7. The Tuesday calls had evolved into something less scheduled and more constant texts through the day. Photographs back and forth. The particular intimacy of someone who exists in your peripheral vision, even when they're not there. Owen would be in a site meeting and find himself noting something. A structural detail, a material choice. The way light moved through a particular glass configuration, and thinking Audrey would have something to say about that. Not because she knew architecture, because she knew how to look at things. Sophie's Wednesday photographs from Audrey had become the fixed point of her week. She treated them with a curator's seriousness, pinning them to a corkboard above her desk, in ascending order. Building a visual record of a city she'd never been to through the eyes of a woman who was learning to love it without surrendering her longing for home. Owen sometimes looked at that corkboard after Sophie was in bed and understood that his daughter had built something with Audrey that didn't need him in the middle of it. It was theirs. He was adjacent to it, which was exactly right. What he hadn't anticipated was how much that would move him. The extension offer came on a Thursday in April, 7 months after the wedding. Audrey didn't call first. She texted, which was unusual for something significant, and Owen read it standing in his office with a half-eaten lunch on his desk. "They offered me another year. Same project, expanded scope. I need to think. Can you talk tonight?" He typed back, "I'll be home by 7. Call whenever you're ready." He put his phone face down on his desk and looked at the blueprint in front of him and saw none of it. He sat with the feeling instead of managing it the way he'd been practicing. The feeling was not simple. It was layered in the way that honest feelings are layered. There was the genuine gladness, real and immediate, because a second year meant the work was exceptional and the foundation had recognized it, and Audrey deserved every confirmation that she was exactly as good as she knew she was. And underneath that, pressing against it, was something he was not proud of, but was going to be honest about. He wanted her home. Not instead of the second year. Alongside it. Simultaneously and impossibly. He wanted both things for her, and he wanted her back, and those desires sat next to each other in his chest all afternoon without resolving. Sophie asked at dinner why he was quiet. "Thinking," he said. "About Audrey." He looked at his daughter across the table. She got offered more work in New York, a second year. Sophie put down her fork. She was 8 now, had turned 8 in January, with a birthday party where Audrey had video called in and sung happy birthday badly and deliberately making Sophie laugh so hard she'd nearly knocked over the cake. 8 felt different from 7, more deliberate. "Are you sad?" Sophie asked. "I'm proud of her." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. At Claire's jaw. Claire's directness, the way honest confrontation had skipped a generation and landed in his daughter at full force. "Both," he said. "I'm both." Sophie picked up her fork again. She ate a bite of chicken. Then, "We could visit." "What?" "New York. We could visit her there." She said it like she'd been thinking about it for a while. "I've never been." She talks about the birds, the sparrows. "I want to see the sparrows." Owen looked at his daughter. "When did you get so practical?" "I've always been practical. You just don't notice because I'm also very artistic." He almost smiled. "Where did you hear that?" "Audrey said it. She said I had my father's precision and my own artistic vision, and that was a dangerous combination." Sophie delivered this with complete seriousness. "I think she meant it as a compliment." "She did." "So." Sophie pointed her fork at him, not accusatorially, but with the emphasis of someone making a point. "We could visit. And she could come back for things. And it could keep working." He looked at his 8-year-old daughter, who had just outlined a long-distance relationship strategy with more clarity than he'd managed in 7 months of living it. "You've thought about this," he said. "I think about a lot of things," Sophie said. "You just don't always ask." He put down his own fork. "Sophie, what do you think I should tell her?" She considered this with the gravity it deserved. "I think you should tell her the true thing, like you always tell me to." "The true thing is complicated." "True things usually are." She picked up her milk. "You always say that." He called Audrey at 7:15 when Sophie was in her room with her bird notebook and her corkboard and the particular self-sufficiency of a child who understood that some conversations were for adults. Audrey picked up on the first ring. "Tell me what you're actually feeling," she said. "Not hello, just that." "I'm proud of you," Owen said. "That's the first thing, and it's real." And the second thing, he sat at the kitchen table where he'd sat 100 evenings. The chair that faced the backyard. The tomatoes coming up in their row along the south fence. "I want you home," he said. "That's also real." Silence on the line. "I'm not asking you to come home," he said. "I'm telling you what's true because you asked what I was feeling." "I know the difference." Her voice was careful. "Owen, when you say you want me home, what does that mean? What does home mean in that sentence?" He thought about it. The specific architecture of the question. "It means I want you in the same time zone. I want to show you the tomatoes I planted. I want Sophie to take your picture on the creek path with the interesting bark trees." He paused. "I want to stop running the conversion in my head every time I look at a clock." That's very specific for someone who just said it was complicated. Complicated and specific aren't mutually exclusive. He heard her breathe. "There's something I haven't told you." He waited. "The foundation offered me the extension, and my first thought, my absolute first thought, before the pride, before the calculation, before anything professional, was that another year meant another year of Tuesday nights and Wednesday photographs and visiting when our schedules align and—" She stopped. "I'm good at this work, Owen. I'm doing something that matters. And I'm tired of it being the only thing I come home to. The apartment, the size of his kitchen." He thought about it, had thought about it often. "Then take the extension," he said. "Owen. Take it. Complete it. Do the work you're there to do." He kept his voice steady. "And Sophie and I will visit. And you'll come back for the things that matter. And we'll keep doing Tuesday nights, and we'll add a few more calls in between. And when it's done—" He stopped. "When it's done, we'll figure out what's next. Together. Explicitly." "Explicitly," she repeated. "I'm an architect. I like things with clear structural intention." She laughed, the open, slightly undignified one. He'd gotten very good at making her produce that one, which was one of his private achievements. "Together," she said. "Together." A beat. Owen, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it without being kind. Just be honest. Okay. Do Sophie and I matter enough for your life to become inconvenient? Not permanently, not fatally. Just inconvenient. Rearranged. Harder than it would be if you just... Her voice caught slightly recovered. If you just stayed behind the wall. He sat at the table and looked at the tomatoes along the south fence and thought about a man who had spent 4 years building walls that looked like responsibility, who had called his fear a sacrifice and believed it sincerely, who had stood in a wedding reception looking for the earliest reasonable exit and instead found a woman who blocked his path with one hand flat against a garden gate. Yes, he said, you matter enough. You didn't hesitate. I've been practicing honesty. You taught me. She was quiet for a moment. Then, okay, I'm taking the extension. Good. And you're coming to New York. When? June. Bring Sophie. She wants the sparrows. She told me. She also told me, Audrey said, that you planted tomatoes. She sent me a photograph. He looked out at the garden. She wasn't supposed to tell you before I did. She said you were building up to it romantically, and she didn't have time for that. He pressed his hand over his eyes and laughed a real laugh, the kind that was slightly undignified, the kind he was relearning. 8 years old, and already impatient with my process. She's my favorite person, Audrey said. It came out simply like a fact without caveat or performance. After you. He sat with that for a long moment. After me, he repeated. Don't make it weird. I'm not making it weird. He stopped. Thank you. For what? For saying the true thing. Chang. June in New York was loud and hot, and completely overwhelming, and Sophie loved it with the totality that only children can love overwhelming things. Audrey met them at Penn Station. She'd taken the morning off her shoot schedule, which was not a small thing, and Owen knew it, and Sophie spotted her first from 20 feet away, and let go of Owen's hand, and ran. Which was the second time Sophie had run toward something in a public space, and the first time Owen felt nothing but relief about it. Audrey caught her. She crouched and caught her and stood up with Sophie's arms around her neck and looked at Owen over the top of his daughter's head with an expression that had no performance in it at all. He walked up and put his hand briefly on the back of Audrey's neck, the first time he'd touched her in 7 months, and she closed her eyes for just a second, the way you close your eyes against something bright. Hi, she said. Hi, Sophie said from between them. Can we see the sparrows now? They spent 4 days in New York. Owen had booked a small hotel in Brooklyn because Audrey's apartment was as advertised the size of his kitchen, and also because he was a practical man who understood that proximity had its own architecture and some structures needed to be built in stages. Audrey showed them her city. Not the tourist version, her version. The bakery with the window she'd photographed in January. The block where she'd found Gerald the sweater-wearing dog, whose owner turned out to be a retired jazz musician named Frank, who let Sophie hold Gerald for approximately 11 minutes, while Frank told them the history of the neighborhood in more detail than any of them needed and all of them wanted. The fire escape garden she'd described from a phone call in November, still alive in June. The tomatoes now enormous and slightly chaotic. The family who owned them bringing out coffee and cookies when Audrey introduced her and explaining their cultivation philosophy with passionate specificity. Sophie documented everything. She shot 3 rolls on Owen's old point-and-shoot he'd bought her. Actual film had found a lab in Raleigh that still developed it because Audrey had said once that there was something about not being able to see the photograph immediately that made you more honest about the moment, and Sophie had taken this seriously. She didn't show anyone what she'd shot. She said she'd show them when they were developed. Owen watched Audrey in her city. He'd known her in Raleigh, in the wedding garden, in the coffee shop on Glenwood, in the studio with the photographs pinned at angles on the creek path where Sophie had found her interesting bark trees. He'd built his picture of her from those encounters and from 7 months of phone calls and photographs and Tuesday nights. But New York had done something to her, and he could see it, not a change exactly. More like a fuller version. The way a building looks complete once you see it with the surrounding structures in place. She moved through the city like she'd made peace with it. confident without being aggressive, curious without being lost. She knew the coffee order at 3 different places, and the shortcut through a park that saved 11 minutes, and the name of the man who sold newspapers on the corner of her block, who called her the picture lady, and asked after her family, and she said, glancing at Owen and Sophie, "They're here actually this week." And the man had said, "I knew it, I could tell by how you're walking," which was a thing that made Owen want to ask follow-up questions he didn't quite know how to formulate. On the 3rd evening, Sophie fell asleep early. Genuinely exhausted, not managed to sleep, but knocked flat by 4 days of New York, and Owen and Audrey sat on the small roof deck of a bar 2 blocks from his hotel that she knew, and it was warm, and the city was doing its summer thing around them, and she told him about the project. Not the professional version she'd described in their calls, the full version. The family in the Bronx rebuilding after foreclosure. The woman in Queens who had restarted her restaurant 3 times. The father in Brooklyn who had lost his son and poured the grief into building a community garden that now fed 60 families. She talked about them with the particular love of someone who has been trusted with other people's real lives and understands the weight and privilege of that trust. "You're going to do extraordinary work with this," Owen said, not as a compliment, as an assessment. "I already am." She said it without apology. "I'm good at this." "I know. James used to." She stopped, started again differently. "I used to respond to me saying things like that with "yeah, but," like my confidence needed to be balanced, qualified." She looked at Owen. "You never do that. Your confidence doesn't need balancing, it's accurate." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know what you are, an architect. You're a load-bearing wall," she said. "You make the structure safe enough for everything else to exist." He looked at her. "I don't know whether that's the most romantic or the least romantic thing anyone has said to me." "It's both," she said, "like most true things." He reached across the table and took her hand. He'd been working up to it another structure built in stages, and it came out not dramatically, just as a decision. A turn of his wrist, his hand covering hers on the table. She looked down at their hands, then at him. 7 months, she said. 7 months and 4 days. Since you took my card. Since you gave me your personal number. He kept his hand where it was. Not the business one. She turned her hand over so they were palm to palm. A small adjustment. The kind that changes everything. They stayed on the roof until the bar closed, and the city kept going around them, and Owen thought about something Nathan had said at the wedding against his ear. "She noticed you first, you know." He'd carried it like information for 7 months. Sitting here now, her hand in his, he understood it differently. It wasn't about sequence. It wasn't about who moved first. It was about 2 people who had both been looking at the same space and hadn't known the other was looking too. Joe. Sophie's photographs came back from the lab 2 weeks after they returned from New York. She sat at the kitchen table and went through them slowly, with the seriousness of a professional reviewing a shoot, and she made a small pile of the ones she wanted to keep and set aside the ones she'd have done differently. Owen sat across from her and didn't ask to see them. He waited. She slid 3 across the table. The first was the fire escape garden shot from below, looking up at the tomatoes against the sky. The second was Gerald the sweater-wearing dog in Sophie's arms. Both of them looking at something off-frame. Both of them slightly blurred in the way that matters don't stop moving. The third was Owen and Audrey on the roof of the bar, shot from Sophie's seat at the adjacent table where she'd been for approximately 1 minute before declaring she was tired and asking to go back to the hotel. Owen hadn't known she'd taken it. He didn't remember her picking up the camera. In the photograph, Owen had just reached for Audrey's hand. He was looking at her. She was looking at his hand on hers. Neither of them was performing anything. He looked at it for a long time. "That's the best one," Sophie said. "Yeah," Owen said. "It is. I'm going to send it to her. She'll want a print." Sophie took the photograph back and looked at it with professional assessment. "I'm going to need more film," she said. The second year moved differently than the first. Owen understood it later as the difference between surviving a distance and inhabiting one. In the first year, they'd been managing the miles, counting down, calculating, holding things in place until the next visit or call or photograph. In the second year, they stopped counting and started living inside the arrangement instead. It didn't become easy. It became real, which is a different thing. Audrey visited in September for Sophie's school play. Sophie had a speaking role, 4 lines, which she had delivered to Owen and then to Audrey over video call approximately 97 times in the preceding 2 weeks. Audrey flew down on a Thursday evening and flew back Sunday morning, and in between, she sat in the 3rd row and filmed the whole thing on her phone, even though Owen was also filming it. And afterward, she took Sophie and Owen to dinner, where Sophie gave a detailed performance review of every other child in the play, which was highly specific and only slightly merciless, and Audrey listened with complete attention and appropriate feedback. Owen visited New York twice more, once alone in October, when Nathan and Lena kept Sophie for a weekend, and Owen took the train up Friday afternoon and came back Sunday night, and once in December with Sophie for the holidays, where they discovered that New York at Christmas was either magical or insane, depending on the moment, and usually both simultaneously. The October visit was the one that changed the internal architecture. He and Audrey had 1 full day and 2 evenings, which sounds like not much, but which was in the particular calculus of people who had spent 14 months across 400 miles from each other, an abundance. They walked. They ate in the places she loved. He let her show him how she saw the city, and she let him show her what he saw when she wasn't looking. The bones of buildings, the load-bearing logic of structures that had stood for a century. The way a city is a conversation between everyone who ever built something in it. On the second evening, he told her about Claire. Not the management version, not the practiced, careful account. He gave people who asked the one with appropriate emotional temperature and a clear beginning and middle. The real version. The morning it happened. The drive, the waiting room, the doctor's face. The first time Sophie had asked where Mommy went, and he had sat on the kitchen floor and pressed his back against the cabinet because he hadn't been able to stand. Audrey sat next to him and didn't say, "I'm sorry." She said, "Tell me something about her that nobody at the funeral said." He thought about it. She was a terrible driver, but she refused to acknowledge it. She had a system of logic about driving that was entirely internal and completely impenetrable. 4 years of marriage, and I never once got her to admit she'd done something wrong behind the wheel. Did she actually do things wrong behind the wheel? She once drove the wrong way down a one-way street for half a block while telling me I was overreacting. Audrey put her hand over her mouth. No. She was absolutely composed about it, completely unbothered. And you? I was. He shook his head. I was catastrophizing according to her. She said I saw disaster potential in situations that were clearly fine. He looked at his hands. She wasn't wrong, actually. I do that. Past tense, Audrey said. I'm working on it. Present tense. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture he remembered from the studio, the setting something down gesture. She sounds like someone who made you braver, Audrey said, even when you drove her crazy. She made everything braver, he said. The whole house. Sophie still has her. In the way she walks into rooms. He paused. I think Sophie has her directness and my precision, and somehow that combination is going to be completely unstoppable and also slightly terrifying. I've been saying that for months. I know. I just wanted you to know I see it too. She lifted her head and looked at him. Owen, what are we doing? I need you to say it explicitly, structurally. He looked at her, at the direct eyes and the camera on the table between them and the woman who had walked into a garden and blocked his exit and demanded an honest thing before he could disappear. I love you, he said. That's the structure. Everything else is load-bearing detail. She looked at him for a long moment. That might be the most architect thing anyone has ever said to me. You said that about the first honest thing, too. You've gotten better at honest things, she said. But you've gotten worse at hiding that you're an enormous nerd about buildings. I'm not hiding it. No, she agreed. You're really not. She reached across the table. I love you too, for what it's worth. It's worth everything, he said. Just so we're clear on the load-bearing calculations. She threw a napkin at him, which was the second thing she'd thrown at him, which felt like another milestone. The call from the foundation came in January, 14 months after the wedding. Audrey had been expecting it, had told Owen it was coming, had spent 2 weeks quietly preparing herself for the choice. They were offering her a permanent position. Full-time staff photographer for the foundation based in New York, a salary that would triple her current contract rate, benefits, travel budget, the institutional platform she'd spent a decade trying to build on her own. She called him after she got off the phone with them. He was at his desk. It was 4 in the afternoon, and he knew from the first second she spoke that she had something to work out. "Tell me about the job," he said. She told him. All of it, the details, the opportunity, the things it would mean professionally. She laid it out the way she laid everything out, precisely and completely, and he listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What did you feel when they offered it?" A long pause. "I felt like I was being handed the thing I would have wanted 2 years ago. And now? Now I feel like I've spent 14 months photographing people who rebuilt their lives after losing things, and the thing I've learned, the thing that's in every single photograph I've taken, is that starting over and going back aren't the same thing, and neither one is better than the other, and the only wrong choice is the one you make because you're afraid." Owen was quiet. "I don't want to say no because I'm afraid of being away from you," she said. "And I don't want to say yes because I'm afraid of what it means to come home." "What does it mean to come home?" She was quiet for a moment. "It means deciding. Not about the long distance anymore. About what the actual structure looks like. The full thing." "Are you scared of that? Aren't you?" I thought about the man who had spent 4 years building walls that looked like responsibility, who had called his fear a sacrifice, who had stood at a garden gate while a woman with her hand flat against the iron demanded one honest thing. "Yes," he said. "But I'm also—" He stopped. "I'm also the person who planted tomatoes, who answers the phone on the first ring now, who let Sophie take a photograph I didn't know she was taking." He paused. "I'm not the same person who was looking for the exit at that wedding." "I know you're not." Her voice was softer. "I'm not the same person either." "So don't make the decision from fear," he said. "Either direction. Make it from what you want." She was quiet for a long time. "I want to come home," she said. "Not because New York doesn't matter, because I've finished what I came to do, because I've learned the difference between building a career and building a life. And I know now that I want both, and they don't have to be in the same city forever for that to be true." A breath. "I want to photograph the kind of work I've been doing here, but I want to do it close enough to drive to a creek on a Sunday morning." "We could go Sunday mornings," Owen said. "Sophie would want to come. She has the interesting bark map basically memorized at this point." "I know. She sent me an updated version last week." He smiled. "She didn't tell me she updated it." "She has her own relationship with me," Audrey said. "You're adjacent to it." "I know." He meant it. "I'm glad." Another pause. Then, "I'm going to turn down the permanent position." "Okay. And I'm going to finish the contract 4 more months and then I'm coming home." "Okay." "Owen, when I say home, I know what you mean. I need you to say it back." He looked at the south fence through the window. The tomato plants cut back to nothing for winter waiting. "Come home," he said. "We'll figure out the rest of the structure together, explicitly." She laughed, the open one, the real one. "You and that word." "It's a good word." "It is," she agreed. "Okay, 4 more months. 4 more months." After he hung up, he sat at his desk for a while, without doing anything professional. He thought about a wedding in Virginia 14 months ago, and a woman who had demanded one honest thing before he could disappear, and a card with a personal number on it that he'd turned over in his hands in the kitchen at 3 a.m. He thought about Sophie saying, "Like you were paying attention." I thought about what it costs to pay attention. What you have to give up, the management and the walls and the comfortable distance of a life arranged so that nothing can get close enough to matter. He thought about what it costs not to. He picked up his phone and texted Sophie, "Audrey's coming home in 4 months." Sophie texted back in under a minute. She was in school. She was absolutely not supposed to be on her phone. Owen noted this and did not address it. I know. She already told me. Can we fix the garden before she gets here? He looked at the south fence through the window. Yeah, he typed back. We can fix the garden. He put his phone down and pulled up the blueprint he'd been working on. But before he got back to it, he sat for one more moment in the quiet of his office, in the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of a life that had been rearranged by a single evening and a hand flat against a garden gate, and he let himself feel the full weight of what was coming. Not managed, not at a careful distance, just felt. He was getting very good at that. Audrey came home on a Thursday in May, 18 months after Nathan's wedding, and she came home the way she did most things, without ceremony, without performance, on her own terms and her own timeline. Owen and Sophie drove to the airport. She had said not to. She had said she'd take a ride share, that it was fine, that she didn't want the pressure of an airport arrival, that she still cried at airports, and she wasn't starting her next chapter, ugly crying at baggage claim. Owen had said okay. Sophie had said nothing at all, which was the tell. Sophie only went quiet when she'd already decided something, and was simply waiting for events to catch up to her decision. They were standing at the arrivals exit when Audrey came through, pulling a single large case and carrying her camera bag on one shoulder, and she stopped when she saw them. She looked at Owen, at Sophie, at Button, who Sophie was holding at her side, with the particular casualness of someone trying to look like they hadn't specifically brought Button for this moment. I said not to come, Audrey said. Sophie made an executive decision, Owen said. Sophie held up Button. Button wanted to come. Audrey looked at the worn rabbit, then at Sophie. Something in her face did the thing it had done that night in the wedding garden, the recognition, the looking at something she wanted to remember. She crossed the distance between them and pulled Sophie into a hug that was not careful, not measured, not the provisional warmth of someone still assessing the situation. It was the hug of someone who had been away for a year and 4 months and was done being away. Sophie buried her face in Audrey's shoulder and held on. Owen watched his daughter hold on, and he felt the thing he'd been practicing, feeling, not managing, not at a careful distance. He let it be there, the full weight of it, the gratitude and the love and the grief underneath both of those things, because it was all the same feeling, really. It was all just evidence of what mattered. Audrey looked up at him over Sophie's head. He stepped forward and put his arms around both of them, and the three of them stood at the arrivals exit while the airport moved around them, and nobody said anything for a long moment, because there was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying. The studio opened 6 weeks later. Audrey had started planning it before she left New York, had spent the last 2 months of her contract working the logistics in the evenings, researching locations, pulling together the savings from 18 months of good contract work, calling in connections she'd built in the portrait world over a decade of grinding and caring and getting it right. Owen had helped with the structural assessments of the spaces she was considering. 3 locations each with different bones, different load-bearing realities. And when she found the right one, he told her exactly why it was right. Which was not because it was the biggest, or the cheapest, or the most convenient, but because the light through the north windows was the kind of light that told the truth about people's faces, and Audrey needed truth-telling light. She trusted his assessment. He loved that she trusted it. The space was in a converted building near the university, different from her old studio, bigger with 2 shooting rooms and a small gallery wall and a reception area that she refused to make look corporate. She painted the walls herself, the warm off-white she'd been thinking about since New York, and she pinned photographs at angles rather than hanging them straight, because straight lines still made her feel like she was working for a magazine. Sophie helped her pick the layout of the front room. This was not ceremonial. Audrey actually consulted her, showed her 2 arrangements, and asked which one felt more like arriving somewhere you want to stay. Sophie had walked between the 2 configurations, twice deliberated seriously, and chosen the one that put the window nearest the door, so the first thing you saw when you walked in was light. Good eye, Audrey told her. I learned from someone, Sophie said, and looked at Audrey directly when she said it. Owen was on the other side of the room, and he heard it and turned away to look at something else, because there are moments that belong to other people, and the right thing to do is give them the space to be complete. The photograph went up on the last day before opening. Audrey had printed it herself, a large format. Print the kind that required patience and good paper, and the particular attention she gave to things that mattered. She'd had it mounted and framed, and she and Owen hung it together above the reception desk, while Sophie watched from the doorway with her arms crossed and her chin up, the posture of someone who approves of what's happening and wants that on record. It was a candid from Nathan's wedding. Owen knew the moment he saw it, recognized it without knowing which of the 100 photographs Audrey had taken that night it had come from. It showed the three of them crossing the south lawn in the dark. Owen with a box of favors on one shoulder and the folding display stand under his arm. Audrey, with the box of framed photographs balanced against her chest and her camera swinging from its strap, and Sophie walking between them, holding a small jar of honey she'd taken from one of the favor boxes because she'd wanted to look at it and nobody had told her not to. None of them were looking at the camera. Owen was saying something to Audrey, his head turned toward her mid-sentence. Audrey was looking down at Sophie. Sophie was looking at the honey jar with the complete absorption of a child who has found something interesting and is giving it her full attention. 3 strangers. The first photograph. The moment before they knew they were becoming something. Beneath it, in Audrey's handwriting on a small printed card, were the words, "The night 3 strangers began noticing one another." Owen stood in front of it for a long time. "You didn't tell me you were going to print that one," he said. "I didn't tell you which one I was going to print." "I thought it might be the roof bar photograph, the one Sophie took." "That one's mine," Audrey said. "This one belongs to the studio." He looked at the 3 of them crossing the lawn, unaware becoming. "You were already taking photographs when we were in the storage building." "I always have the camera." "I know. I didn't think—" He stopped. "I didn't think we were already a photograph." "You were," she said. "Before you knew it. That's usually how it works." Sophie came and stood beside him and looked up at the photograph. She looked at her 7-year-old self holding the honey jar. "I remember that," she said. "The honey was really good. We still have some." "We do," Owen confirmed. "We should use it soon. Honey doesn't last forever." He looked at his daughter. "Actually, honey lasts, Dad." She gave him a look that had Claire's patience and Audrey's directness, and something entirely her own, layered on top of both. "I know honey lasts forever. I was making a metaphorical point." Owen looked at Audrey. Audrey pressed her lips together very hard. "Noted," Owen told Sophie. "The honey metaphor is received." Sophie nodded satisfied and went to examine the camera display on the side wall, which Audrey had set up with vintage equipment going back 40 years. The kind of museum-worthy collection that 8-year-olds with no prior photography knowledge somehow always knew to treat with reverence. Nathan arrived for the opening with Lena on his arm and a bottle of champagne that was slightly nicer than the occasion required, which was exactly Nathan. He shook Owen's hand in the doorway. He looked at the studio, the photographs on the walls, the truth-telling light from the north windows, Sophie explaining the vintage camera collection to Lena with a tour guide's authority. And then he looked at Owen for a long moment, with an expression Owen had not seen on Nathan's face before. "I used to think inviting you to my wedding was a mistake," Nathan said. "I remember you telling me it was simultaneously the worst and best decision you ever made. That's what I'm saying now, best decision." Nathan looked at Audrey across the room talking with 2 women. Owen recognized as photographers she'd mentioned from her New York network. Her hands moving the way they always moved when she was talking about work. She cared about not performing enthusiasm, just not containing it. "Look at her." Owen looked. "She's not smaller," Nathan said. "She's not—" He stopped, jaw working slightly. "After James she got smaller, pulled in. I watched it happen, and I didn't have the words for what was wrong until I saw her in New York on a video call one night, 8 months into that contract, and she was big again. The way she was when she was 11, and she fixed that broken camera by herself." He looked at Owen. "You didn't make her smaller. She made herself bigger," Owen said. "I just didn't get in the way." "That's not nothing," Nathan said. "That's actually the hardest thing." They stood in the doorway of Audrey's studio and watched the opening fill with people who had come because they wanted to be there. And Lena went and stood with Audrey, and they were laughing about something, and Sophie was still conducting her tour, and the light came through the north windows, the way it did when it was telling the truth. And Nathan said, "She's happy." And Owen said, "Yeah." And there was nothing else to add to that. He proposed that night after the opening, after the guests had gone, and Lena and Nathan had taken Sophie back to their place so she could sleep over and give Owen and Audrey the evening. He hadn't planned a speech. He had thought about planning a speech, had considered the words carefully, the way he considered structural calculations, testing the load, and then decided that planning a speech was the old system, the management, the preparation against feeling something fully in the moment. How was done with the old system? The studio was quiet with just the two of them in it. Audrey was moving through the space doing the last small things, straightening a photograph that had shifted, turning off the display lights in the side room, and Owen was standing in front of the large photograph above the reception desk, the one of the three strangers crossing the lawn, and he was thinking about a man who had stood at a garden gate looking for the earliest reasonable exit. "Audrey," he said. She came out of the side room and stopped when she saw his face. He didn't kneel immediately. He stood and looked at her first because she deserved to be looked at, not the managed, careful version of being seen, but the full version, the one where you let someone matter enough to be frightening. "I spent 4 years building a life that was designed to be safe," he said. "No new entrances, no weight I hadn't accounted for. I told myself it was for Sophie, but it was for me because the one time I let something matter completely, I lost it, and I did not know how to survive that twice." He looked at her. "And then Nathan invited me to a wedding, and you put your hand on a garden gate and asked me for one honest thing, and I've been answering that question ever since." He reached into his jacket pocket. He'd bought the ring 3 weeks ago. Not an impulsive purchase, he'd thought about it carefully, the way he thought about things that were going to hold weight for a long time. He'd bought it from a small jewelry maker in Raleigh, whose work Audrey had photographed once for a local feature, because he wanted it to come from somewhere that already existed inside their story. "I don't want you to give up the person you fought to become," he said. "I don't want to be the reason your life gets smaller, or your work gets quieter, or your dreams get sensible." He looked at her steady. "I want to keep choosing the person who fixed a broken camera at 11 and got on a train to New York and photographed people rebuilding things and came home not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I want to keep choosing her, especially when choosing her is difficult. I want her to keep choosing me." He opened the box. Audrey was looking at him with her direct eyes, and something in them that she was not managing, not containing, not photographing. From a careful distance, she was standing in it fully, the way she'd taught him to stand in things. "Marry me," he said. She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the photograph on the wall behind him, the three strangers, the honey jar the moment before they knew. "You're going to have to help me move my equipment into the back bedroom," she said. "I have more gear than you're expecting." "I know, you mentioned it in November. And Sophie is going to have opinions about where things go. She already has opinions about everything. This will be no different. And I'm going to photograph things at dinner sometimes. Ordinary things. The food, the light, your hands on the table. It's going to be slightly annoying. I'm going to notice the structural deficiencies of every building we walk past and describe them out loud." "That's already annoying." "I know." She looked at him for one more moment. The look she gave things she was deciding about, the look she gave things she'd already decided about, and was simply confirming. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger and stood up, and she put both hands on his face, the gesture he'd been waiting for without knowing. He was waiting. The thing you wait for when someone has had their hands on the camera for so long that the moment they put it down is the moment that matters. She kissed him in the middle of her studio, under the photograph of three strangers becoming something in the truth-telling light of the north windows, and neither of them said anything for a long time after, because there was nothing left to say. At their wedding, Sophie walked down the aisle carrying 2 things. In her left hand, Button the worn rabbit, who had been to a wedding reception to New York and back to a market on a February Saturday through everything. In her right hand, a small framed photograph of Claire. Owen had asked her if she wanted to carry it, and she had said yes immediately without deliberation, which told him it was something she'd already thought about. She walked with the deliberate seriousness of a 9-year-old who understood that what she was doing meant something and wanted to do it right. When she reached the front, she handed Button to Owen. He held the rabbit through the entire ceremony and would deny this meaning anything unsuccessfully. And she held the photograph of Claire at her side, and she stood next to both her parents, the one she'd always had and the one she'd chosen. Audrey saw the photograph when Sophie arrived at the front. Owen watched her see it. It landed in her eyes, and she did not look away. She looked at it, and then she looked at Sophie, and she nodded once, small and serious, the nod of someone who understands what they've been given and what it costs to give it. Sophie nodded back. Nathan, standing to Owen's left, spent approximately 45 seconds, pretending his eyes were doing something other than what they were doing. Lena held his hand and did not pretend anything. Owen said his vows looking at Audrey, the way he'd learned to look at things, not from a safe distance, not with the careful assessment of a man calculating load and stress and potential failure points, but with the full attention of someone who had decided that being present was worth what it cost. He told her he loved the woman who protected memories and pursued frightening dreams and had counted 49 lights in an oak tree for a 7-year-old who needed to be seen. He told her he loved the woman who had demanded honest things in garden gates and storage buildings and studios and roof bars and airports, until honesty became the only language he had left. He told her he was not afraid of losing her, because losing things was part of being alive, and he had learned slowly, imperfectly, with a great deal of assistance, that the only way to protect yourself from loss was to stop living, and he was done with that. Audrey told him she loved the man who said good when she said she was taking the contract. The man who sent food delivery to a small apartment in New York because it was the only thing he could do from 400 miles away, and who understood that insufficient gestures made with full sincerity are worth more than perfect ones made from a distance. She told him she had spent a year photographing people who rebuilt things after losing them, and that the thing she had learned, the thing in every photograph, the thing she would spend the rest of her career trying to say, was that you cannot rebuild from a safe distance. You have to stand inside the ruin and decide what to keep. She told him she was glad he had stood inside it. She told him she intended to keep all of it. After, when the ceremony was done, and the reception was beginning, and Sophie was running between adults with the freed energy of a child who has sat still for as long as she could manage, Nathan found Owen near the edge of the room. He looked at his sister, dancing with Audrey, holding Sophie's hands. Both of them doing something that bore only conceptual resemblance to the actual music playing, and then he looked at Owen. "I want to say something," Nathan said. "Okay." "You made a decision every day for 18 months to not disappear." He said it plainly, without ornamentation. "I saw it. I want you to know I saw it." Owen looked at him. "You kept me honest. You didn't need me to keep you honest. You needed someone to say out loud what you already knew." Nathan looked back at his sister. "She's never been this. She would have gotten here without me." "Maybe, but she got here with you. That's the part that counts. On the dance floor, if you could call it that." If the area where Sophie had started teaching Audrey a dance she'd invented that involved significantly more spinning than was strictly advisable could be called a dance floor. Audrey looked across the room at Owen mid-spin, her hair coming loose, her face doing the thing it did when she wasn't managing anything at all. She repeated the question she'd asked the first night. He could see it in her face, the familiar shape of it, the directness, the slight lift of her chin. "Am I still beautiful enough to make you forget every other woman in the room?" He crossed the room. He took her hand before Sophie could protest the interruption, and he said it straight to her face, the way she had once said things straight to his. "I never needed to forget anyone." He held her gaze. "I only needed the courage to keep choosing you." Audrey looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the reception moved and the music played, and Sophie was making her case for why the spinning should be reinstated immediately, and Nathan was watching from the edge of the room with Lena's hand in his, and the light was the warm amber of string lights and celebration, the same light as the first night, the same light that had been there from the beginning. "Good answer," Audrey said, and Owen Parker, who had once spent 4 years looking for the earliest reasonable exit, pulled his wife into the center of everything and stayed.